Every country on Earth keeps large piles of American paper money that it can never spend at home, and no nation can afford to stop collecting it. How did the paper of one country become the money of the whole planet? Somewhere far from America, deep inside a foreign central bank, sit tall stacks of green paper. These bills cannot buy a single loaf of bread in that country. Yet the nation locks them away and guards them like treasure. This is not one strange country. Across the world, about 59% of all money that governments hold in reserve is American dollars, roughly 3 times the share of the euro. And more than 8 out of 10 currency trades on Earth touch the dollar. Here is the part that sounds impossible. No country can afford to stop collecting this paper, not even the ones that dislike America. That is the mystery this whole story will answer. Nearly every good traded between nations touches the dollar at some step, even when no American is anywhere in the room. Look closer, and it hides inside your own life. The fuel in a car, a new phone, a plane ticket across the sky. Oat. Each price was built from a chain of deals, and hidden somewhere inside every chain was a dollar. Oil and most raw goods are priced and paid for in it. So where did this power begin? It was not taken by armies. It was agreed to, quietly, inside a hotel, high in the mountains of New Hampshire, in the middle of a world war. The paper was once a solemn promise of gold. Then, one night in August 1971, President Nixon cut that promise. Everyone expected the dollar to fall. Instead, it grew stronger, and this is how that happened. To understand why they built it, you first have to see what they were running from. In the 1930s, money broke down across the world. Banks failed, savings vanished overnight, and people who had worked their whole lives were suddenly left with nothing. Country after country slammed shut the doors of trade, raising walls of taxes to protect themselves. Then they raced to cheapen their own money, each hoping to sell more than the next. It was a race downward, and everyone lost. That chaos did not stay in the banks. It spread into empty stomachs, into anger, into desperate men listening to dangerous voices. The broken money of the 1930s helped feed the poverty and rage that grew into war. Fast forward to 1944. The war is not over. Bombs are still falling. Men are still dying. But the Allies can now see the shape of the ending, and behind the front lines, a colder question is already being asked. When the shooting stops, what money will run the world? One fact quietly decided almost everything. Britain, the old empire that had ruled seas and shaped the value of money for a century, was exhausted. Years of war had drained it. It was buried in debt, owing enormous sums it could not easily repay. Across the ocean, the story was the opposite. America had not been bombed. Its factories were untouched and running harder than ever, pouring out ships, planes, and machines. And in its vaults sat the largest pile of gold on Earth. So, the logic wrote itself. Any new world money would have to be built around the one nation that still had both mountains of gold and factories at full power. Britain had the past. America had the gold, the goods, and the future. The outcome was almost decided before anyone sat down to talk. On the 1st of July 1944, cars climbed a winding mountain road in New Hampshire. About 730 delegates from 44 nations arrived at the Mount Washington Hotel for 3 weeks that would quietly redraw how the whole world handled money. One man drew every eye. John Maynard Keynes, of Britain, the most famous economist alive, his body weak and his heart failing, yet his mind burning with one bold dream. He wanted a brand new shared world currency that no single country would ever own. Across the table sat Harry Dexter White of the American Treasury. Sharp, blunt, and impatient, and holding the strongest cards in the room, his goal was simpler than any dream: build the whole system around the American dollar. So, the two visions collided. Keynes wanted balance, no nation ruling over the rest. White wanted the dollar at the center of everything. But arguments do not decide these things. The country holding the gold and the factories writes the rules, and everyone knew which country that was. The winning design was almost elegant. Every major currency would be locked to the dollar at a fixed value, and the dollar alone could be swapped for gold at exactly $35 an ounce, but only by foreign governments and central banks, never by ordinary people. That is why it felt as solid as metal. Every currency was tied to the dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. Follow the chain, and all the money in the world became, in a way, gold you could hold without a single ounce ever leaving the vault. Then the machinery was born. The conference created two great institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both formally alive by the 27th of December 1945, with 21 founding nations. And from the very first day, America took the largest share and the largest vote, locking in its command. For a while, the design worked almost like a miracle. Ruined nations rebuilt, factories reopened, and trade across borders grew year after year, all resting on one steady anchor. The world hummed on stable money. But the dollar carried a strange burden. For the whole system to breathe, dollars had to leave America and spread across the world, so other nations could hold them, trade with them, and keep reserves. So America kept sending its dollars abroad. And here, a quiet problem began to grow. More and more dollars floated around the globe, far more than America held in gold, to cover them at $35 an ounce. The two numbers were slowly drifting apart, a hidden imbalance. Then, the costs piled higher. The Cold War, military bases scattered across foreign soil, the war in Vietnam, and a hungry appetite for goods back home, every one of them pushed still more dollars out the door through the 1960s. By 1967, the pressure showed. The IMF invented a patch, a new kind of reserve called special drawing rights, quickly nicknamed paper gold. It was clever, but it was also a signal. The plumbing of the whole system was starting to strain. Foreign governments did the arithmetic and grew uneasy. Their dollars were called as good as gold, yet there plainly was not enough gold to cover them all. So some began quietly asking for the metal itself, and France led the way to claim its gold. And that was the danger. A run was building on Fort Knox itself. The whole promise rested on one silent assumption, that not everyone would ask for gold at once. If they did, the promise would simply break. Something had to give. In August 1971, a small group of men climbed into the wooded hills of Maryland for a secret weekend. At the presidential retreat, called Camp David, Richard Nixon and his closest advisors sat down with a truth no one wanted to say out loud. The numbers left no room to argue. There was not enough gold to honor the dollars the world now held. The gold window, the door where foreign governments traded paper for metal, could not stay open. It had to be shut. Then came Sunday, the 15th of August. That evening, families across America settled in for their usual television. The program stopped, and the president appeared, calm and steady, to tell the nation something that would quietly change every price on earth. History would name it the Nixon shock. In plain, unhurried words, Nixon announced that the dollar would no longer be exchanged for gold. From that single sentence, the last thread between paper and metal was cut. The promise made in those New Hampshire mountains was, in that moment, dead. From that night, no foreign government could sail a shipment of dollars to America and carry away gold in return. The old price, $35 for 1 ounce, meant nothing now. The world's money had become pure paper, backed by nothing you could hold, touch, or weigh in your hand. Here is the twist no one expected. The world did not run from the dollar. It kept its crown. There was simply no better place to turn. America's economy still towered over every rival, and trust, not gold, now held the whole system up. The old, fixed system was quietly dismantled. First came a patch in December of 1971, an attempt to nail the currencies back in place. It failed. By the spring of 1973, nations gave up and let their money simply float, its value set each day by the market itself. The dollar had lost its gold, and then the world seemed to tilt. In the early 1970s, oil prices exploded, and money poured toward the nations, sitting on the fuel that every engine, factory, and city on Earth needed to run. Suddenly, the sellers held enormous wealth, and a single question hung over the whole planet. When the world lined up to buy oil, which country's money would it have to pay with? The answer came from the desert. The biggest sellers, led by Saudi Arabia, chose to price their oil in one currency, and one currency only, the American dollar. Then came the clever loop. The mountains of cash the oil sellers earned did not sit still. Much of it flowed straight back into American assets like U.S. Treasuries, tying the world's richest sellers to the health of the dollar itself. This was the petrodollar, a quiet circle where oil went out, dollars came in, and those dollars returned to America to be lent and invested all over again. Now look at the trap in plain terms. To buy the fuel that ran every economy on Earth, you first had to get your hands on dollars. It no longer mattered if you liked America or not. You needed its paper to keep your lights on. So the transformation was complete. The paper had lost its gold, but it had gained something far harder to escape. The dollar was no longer just money. It had become the shared language of global trade. So, look closely at what the dollar had become. It was no longer a claim on a shining metal locked in a vault. It was now a promise of trust. Trust in America's economy, its laws, and its power to stand behind the paper. There were no more gold bars underneath it. Instead, there were courts that honored contracts, factories that kept humming, and a military that reached across the oceans. People held the paper because they believed the country behind it would not fail. And here sat the quiet, enormous imbalance at the heart of it all. One nation could simply print the paper that the whole world uses to price things and store its savings, while every other country had to work, sell, and export to earn it. Think about what that means. A farmer in one country, a factory in another, a shipping firm on a third continent, all of them had to first get dollars before they could trade freely. America made the money. Everyone else chased it. And that grip did not loosen. It tightened. Today, more than 80% of all currency trades in the world involve the dollar on one side of the deal. It sits inside almost every large exchange, quietly, like a middleman no one voted for. Look at where nations keep their savings. About 59% of all official reserves held by governments around the world are stored in dollars, roughly 3 times as much as the next contender, the euro. No other money comes close. So the promise had changed its shape entirely. It began as gold you could weigh. It ended as confidence you could only believe in. And somehow, that belief held the world together tighter than metal ever had. So walk back into that room where we began the foreign vault. Thousands of miles from America, its shelves lined with the same green paper. Nothing has changed on the surface. But now, you know why the guards watch it so closely. These bills cannot buy a single loaf of bread in this country. Yet a nation that may not even like America keeps them like treasure, because to hold them is to hold a share of the world's trust, made solid enough to lock behind a door, and it was never won by an army. It began as gold you could weigh in a mountain hotel, and it ends as something lighter and stranger, a paper that measures the worth of everything, backed by nothing you can hold in your hand. So look down at the note in your hand. It is only paper, but the whole planet has quietly agreed to believe in it, and that belief, not gold, is what now holds the world together. The dollar stopped being a promise of gold and became a promise of trust in America's economy, its laws, and its power. If you enjoyed this story, Subscribe, there is always another one worth telling.